Two, one. Good evening and welcome to the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. I'm Malek Green, sitting in for the vacationing Harold Fisher. Well, tonight we begin our three-part series, taking a look at a different side of the federal government upheaval, survivor's remorse. Across federal agencies, pink slips, they continue to fly daily, and yet some are still standing. They've kept their jobs, but at what emotional cost? The desks next to them are now empty, the hallways quieter, and in the silence, there's a mix of gratitude and guilt. How do you carry on when your colleagues no longer can? Well, tonight we begin with the emotional and psychological toll of survivor's remorse. And my guest tonight is Dr. Vanessa Weaver, a nationally renowned organizational psychologist with more than 30 years of experience guiding Fortune 500 companies through major transformations. Dr. Weaver specializes in helping organizations navigate the emotional and psychological impact of change. And she joins us to discuss survivor syndrome and how it affects individuals, teams, and workplace culture. Dr. Weaver, thank you so much for joining us this evening for this important conversation.
Thank you, and I commend your station for really hosting this kind of conversation because it's often one that isn't spoken about. Yet when you look at the survivors, the survivor remorse or the survivor syndrome, there are a lot of people, sometimes they feel like they're the walking wounded. As I've spoken to several, they oftentimes call themselves the lucky, unlucky ones. They're lucky to have a job, but they're unlucky in terms of the kind of psychological trauma that they feel they're going through. So my hat's off to you.
Well, thank you for that. So let's get into more of a definition so everyone can know what this is. For many people, they don't know that they are experiencing survivor's remorse in the workplace context. So give us more of what exactly we're talking about.
Well, it's an intensely human kind of experience and consequence, and really it's the psychological reaction to a restructuring or transformation effort that's going on in an organization. And a lot of times it's characterized by anxiety, the fear of, am I going to be next, or is my job in jeopardy, or kind of what are these folks up to? It also has a tremendous amount of guilt. Individuals who have had colleagues and folks that they work with 5, 10, 15, even 20 years, look, as you said, next at the next desk, and they're no longer there. And they wonder, should I be happy that I have a job? I'm feeling kind of guilty. Why them and not me? Did I do something to be complicit in the decision to keep me and let them go? So it's a lot of guilt and sadness that people feel. And then it's a significant or substantial decline in morale with employees. I mean, they feel just, not good about where they work, or not excited about what they're doing, or for that matter, not clear about what it is they've been asked to do. And so you see a morale in the organization's employee base. So it's a real thing. And it's not just unique to this federal government restructuring that we're going through now, but it is a common reaction, but it becomes more intense by the way that the management and the leadership of an organization handle it.
And that was what was going to be my next question, the way in which it went down with so many federal government workers. It just went so fast and so ferociously, and it just was handled in a way that just was brutal and quick, that I can't even imagine how those who survived could even handle surviving it the way it went down. Well, without feeling it.
To not have some feelings about structuring would say you're probably less than empathetic person. And while I'm not speaking to the brutality of it or the way it was handled, because that's up for debate, depending on whose lens you're looking at,
Yeah.
clearly it was very public. And many of the folks who have dedicated their lives and their careers to serving the United States citizen, who felt proud about the work that they do and that they've done and the contributions, felt like they were disrespected and marginalized. And so it was a lot of personal, angst, and some felt, just outright insulted by the names that people called them and the way that they were characterized. So you had all of that going on, and plus it was a big media story, and rightfully so, in terms of the impact on the federal government. I mean, the intention was for us to lose about, what, a third of our federal government.
Yeah.
That's significant. That's a significant amount of folks. And so, yeah, it
Yeah, we covered it a lot
yeah,
on HUR, but of course, on NBC4 as
yeah,
well. You
yeah,
mentioned the morale, of
yeah,
course, takes a beating.
right,
Let's talk about job performance taking a beating as well, for those who are left. I mean, so your coworker is gone, you're
yeah,
there, left,
yes,
and you have to do your job, but now you have to take on an extra load or two, three extra loads because your coworker and coworkers are now not there.
correct.
And so the job performance is going to take a hit, I would
And,
imagine,
and
in
to
many kinds of ways, and not good.
and to your point, because I'm always kind of a numbers person, I try to understand what is the data saying to help us better understand the behavior.
Yeah.
But the American Psychological Association did a study, and they found that 61% of what we call those who have survivor's remorse, 61% of them report being extremely stressed out
Mm.
going to work. Although they have a job, they are very, very stressed out. That's 6 out of every 10 people. And then to the performance question that you talked about, there's a 31% decline in morale off the top. Folks are not feeling good about, their jobs. Many of them don't even feel good about themselves because they're kind of confused
Right.
with all of these messages that are out in the system about them. And then 25% drop in performance. Can you imagine trying to run an organization and 25% of your folks are underperforming? And not because they're lazy or they're not committed. It's because they're feeling very stressed out and maybe not clear about, are they going to have a job or not clear about what is going to be the nature of the role that I'm supposed to play. I've been coaching several individuals in the federal sector, and many of them say, I'm not really clear about what my job is. And to your point, I'm now having to do the work of 3 or 4, what they call FTEs, full-time employees. I have to do the work of 3 or 4 of them on top of what I was doing. And so I'm not only am I stressed out, but I'm maxed out and I'm just physically tired. And so it's really an opportunity for the leadership to step back and say, what are the things we need to do? Not maybe focusing on how it was executed, because there sure was a lot of room for improvement in that. But now, how do we need to support those individuals who are there? Because survivor syndrome is very real, and survivor's remorse is very, very real.
Yeah, and I would think your immediate supervisor, your direct reports, you know, they're going through a lot as well, being
Exactly.
thrust in this position, but they have got to step up and handle their staff members who are going through a lot as well, because they've got to get the work done. We're talking about agencies that are vital
Yeah,
to operating the government
that's right.
systems
For this
here.
country to run,
Yeah,
we need our agencies fully functioning, no question about it. And the
yeah,
contributions that the federal and government employees make to just our well-being is phenomenal. And I think it's probably misunderstood and undervalued how significant a role they play. And just
hmm
us being able to know when we stop at a red light, it's gonna stay there for a second. You know what I mean? Just the things we take for granted. So yeah. So it
What's
is.
your?
Go
Oh,
on.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Dr. Weaver. Um, uh, what's your recommendation for folks who are dealing with survivor's remorse and going through all of the things that you have just touched on, the emotional, psychological weight of it all, and feeling the impacts on their job performance and their morale at work.
Yeah.
What do you suggest for them at this point?
Well, I know you and I are going to have an opportunity to talk some more this week. And on one of our segments, we're going to specifically drill down to what an individual employee can do. But let me just give you a top line and hope that excites people to come and hear the rest of our discussion on this. But the first thing I would suggest and recommend for an individual is to acknowledge that you're having some feelings about it. You mean a lot of us try to, particularly because we're trying to shelter our families and people around us, we try to kind of, suffer in silence and not really acknowledge or put voice to what it is we're feeling, thinking. We're staying up at night, we're not eating, or we're overeating, or whatever way you cope with your stress. So the first thing is to acknowledge that you're having a reaction. And the second step I would recommend is to go and talk to someone, a trusted advisor, a counselor, or coach, but really talk out what your symptoms or your reactions are to it. And then third, have a conversation with the supervisor. Now, to your point, you said earlier, supervisors are going through it too. So I don't know in situations how comforting that would be. But you do have the responsibility to engage in a conversation with your supervisor and ask for the truth in terms of what does he or she know or understand about how this is going to impact your immediate work environment. And then I would tell you the fourth thing is to always be prepared. You want to update your resume. You want to network and have conversations with individuals and just kind of see what the landscape is out there should you decide to make an exit.
Well, I want to talk about the role of silence, being silent, and that part of it factoring into survivor's remorse when no one is talking about what happened. I would imagine that is also happening in some of these offices, and that's not good either. And people feeling like they can't talk about it, people feeling like they shouldn't talk about it, or they just don't trust anybody anymore. There's no trust anymore. I don't trust my coworker because I could be next, or this person could make up a story. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, and as I've spoken to people, a lot of that is going on. Folks are saying, I don't know who I can trust. There's a lot of paranoia in the system. We don't know who's connected to whom. And so some of that is very, very real. And some of that might be imagined too, because if you make assumptions and you don't test those assumptions, then your assumptions become your truth and your reality. And then it may not be the case. But so not knowing who to go to, not knowing who you can trust, not feeling like I have an outlet to really get the truth is really problematic. And so that needs to be addressed. And in fact, one of the recommendations that we make to organizations and to leaders is to really have some open conversations. That's really the number one, to really start having some open conversations and dialogues with people about what is happening and what they can anticipate happening, because it's the anticipation and not knowing that's really driving a lot more of the anxiety.
Yeah. And if you have an office situation like that and you're not getting the support you need from your leadership inside your office setting, and you need this job and you have to go to work the next day and the next month and all of that, and you got to keep the job, what can you do outside of the office to try to process this so you don't explode?
Well, a couple of things that are important. One thing is that we recommend that individuals read their manuals, their HR manuals. They have rules and policies around RIF, letting people go. And we know a lot of people feel like a lot of this hasn't been followed, right? But it's important, number one, that you ground yourself and educate yourself. It surprises me how many folks have not picked up their basic HR manual, have not picked up some of the policies and procedures, so they don't always know what their rights are. So you need to know that, need to educate yourself on what that is. The second piece is that each organization has an HR person or a labor relations person, or if you're with the union, you have a union rep. Go to them. Make sure you've had those conversations with them. Give them an opportunity to inform you about what your rights are, about what they understand is happening, or for that matter, what isn't happening. Make sure you're tapping those resources that are there to educate, inform you, and provide you some support. And then third, really, I would get some external support. If you're feeling very stressed, you can't sleep, you're not eating, or you're eating too much, you find out you're engaging in drinking more or taking some illegal
Yeah.
substances just to manage your stress, then I would really strongly suggest you go and get a counselor or talk to your doctor about how you're coping with this, because developing coping skills that would help you deal with the immediate situation and even the ongoing situation is extremely important. And I know sometimes it's very hard, particularly for people of color, to want to go and get a counselor or therapist or a coach. But I would really strongly recommend that you do so. You got to have some kind of objectivity and some way to bounce off what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're thinking. Let me
Yeah.
give you an example. I was talking to an individual. She'd been with the government for 36 years. And she said, I have all of these skills. I'm an executive here. I've made tremendous contributions, but I know no one in the private sector would even look at me or consider giving me a job. So she had already talked herself out of exploring what options were available for her because of what she thought she heard people say about the caliber of federal government employees. And so I'm saying you need to go to someone who can really kind of, understandably, but gently kind of get you to think about some things in a broader kind of way.
I mean, you just touched on a question that I was about to ask you, Dr. Weaver. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about survivors' remorse, especially in the wake of the federal government upheaval with Dr. Vanessa Weaver, who has been just sensational about giving us some guidance this evening. And we're going to be talking about this for the next several days as we go through processing all of this. Questioning your own self-worth.
Right.
I didn't realize how many friends that I have who have federal government jobs.
Yes.
I knew that they were lawyers, but I didn't know they were lawyers for the federal government. I knew that they were, hired contractors, but not for the federal government until all of this went down, right?
Yes.
And I, as they were processing all of this, and some of them were figuring out whether or not they were going to have a job. And one of them lost 87% of their contracts through the federal government. And they were questioning how they were going to survive and their value and their livelihood and their own self-worth. I think that point, and you touched on it very well, but I think we have to underscore that importance there and how African Americans, people of color, really have to get some help to work through some of this stuff that has caused them.
Yeah. Well, this it's heavy to have pride in what you do and how you contribute, and you're making a difference to the quality of the American people, and then to be told, you come in one day and you no longer need it. Or, to hear the chatter out there in society about government workers don't work that hard. I mean, I don't even know where they got that perception from. And so people do absorb some of that. Unfortunately, they take it, they kind of hold it in and say, well, maybe there's some truth in that. Or you're so used to hearing it, it begins to kind of seep into your brain. I would say step back and get some distance from that. And that's why that coaching that you and I are talking about, or that counseling, or going to someone that you trust becomes very important, because you can start feeling really sorry for yourself or start assuming the guilt for decisions that people made for whatever reasons they made them, and you don't own that.
What about talking openly about job security and grief in the workplace? Can that be therapeutic?
Well, it sure could be. And I would recommend that people have those kind of conversations, or that organizations create opportunities for folks to get together and just to share their anxiety and talk through it. And some groups in the federal government are in fact doing that, asking their people to look at this video that kind of talks to them about change and transformation. I haven't heard that happening a lot, but I know that there's some entities there that are doing that. So, getting that kind of support. And you know what, Millette, I was thinking that even if the organization or your agency doesn't provide it, we have organizations in the community that are providing these kind of services. Now, I can tell you my church, Alpha Street Baptist Church, in Alexandria, Virginia, has all kind of support services to
Mhm.
help folks who have lost their jobs or who are figuring out how they're going to maintain their sanity. They provide kind of workshops and counseling and coaching for those individuals. So there's opportunities for entities in our communities to step up and provide that support if people feel like they cannot get it or don't trust that they can get what they need within their workplaces.
And these federal government workers, I know we've been focusing on them the most in this conversation. They understand keenly that every day is not promised in terms of their job performance. Just today, OPM is changing policy to make it easier to fire federal workers accused of misconduct. New policy will mean workers can be let go within 5 days. Within 5 days. And we're talking about an accusation of
Not
misconduct.
not something that's been investigated and
Thoroughly vetted.
thoroughly
Just
vetted.
an accusation of misconduct could get you fired after decades of work. And so therefore, these uncertain times are here to stay.
Are here to stay.
When these jobs have been looked at, I mean, getting a good government job is no more.
Yeah.
Oh, it's seemingly no more.
Yeah. You used to hear that you better keep that good government job because
yeah.
You have certain protections there. There are policies and rules that have to be followed in order to reprimand an employee or to terminate them. And the federal government had more protections than you often see in the private sector, by the way, I must tell you.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know about this 5-day OPM ruling. I mean, it's concerning because
We'll have to keep our eyes on
because
that.
of the shortage of staff. I mean, it might be very challenging to do an investigation in 5 days.
Yeah. Well, so in the meantime, I would imagine that a lot of workers are depending on each other, leaning on each other for emotional support. What are your thoughts about that? And is that crossing an emotional boundary, or is that a good thing?
Well, I don't think it's crossing an emotional boundary. I think you want to, people who are having a shared experience can oftentimes feel more that they can connect together and support each other. So I would encourage you to have those kind of conversations, but the conversations have to be rooted in not so much of innuendo or you suspect certain things. You don't want it to become a situation where you're just feeding on how bad it is for all of us, and then once you connect, all of you feel like you can really go down the tube. So you should connect with someone where you have a shared experience, but also have those conversations targeting on what can we do that's proactive. How can we support our organization to deliver what it's supposed to deliver? How can we support each other in terms of performing to our optimum? What can we do to help our supervisor? Because, supervisors are going through this survivor syndrome or survivor remorse, and maybe they're not as focused or as precise as they've been in how they lead the organization. So, with all of this dysfunction that's going on, there are clearly opportunities where a person can step up and provide leadership and provide direction. And so you might be asking yourself, what are the opportunities in the situation I'm in that I'm availing myself of? Because that's what
Dr.
you're empowered.
What was that last part?
That's when you feel empowered. When you can say, what are those things that I can do to make a difference? How am I going to step up and take care of myself, take care of this organization, and support my colleagues?
I think that's a good point to end right there. So we're out of time for part one of this very important conversation on survivor's remorse. This is a series. We will continue this tomorrow. I want to thank you, Dr. Weaver, for your time this evening. Clinical psychologist, Dr. Vanessa Weaver, joining us this evening. Now, tomorrow is part two, and we will hear from a federal supervisor working to keep their team intact with navigating more work and the emotional trauma of worker loss. Dr. Weaver, thank you once again. And make sure that you join us for that discussion. Up next on 96.3 WHUR, the original Quiet Storm with the Love King himself, Raheem Devon. I'm
Okay.
Millette Green, in for the vacationing Harold Fisher. Have a good night.